There's a moment when someone stops replying. They don't fight, they don't explain, they just go quiet. And usually, the smarter that person is, the quieter the exit. Someone in your life has done this to you. Or you've done it to someone, and they still don't know why. Most people call it arrogance, isolation, maybe depression, but Carl Jung described this exact pattern almost a century ago, and he called it none of those things. He called it a necessary collapse. Because before you can become who you actually are, something else has to die first. And that death looks exactly like disappearing. We'll walk through the 3 stages of that withdrawal. What triggers it, what happens inside the silence, and the one stage where most people get permanently stuck. Because not everyone who disappears comes back. In 1913, a 38-year-old psychiatrist in Zurich lost the most important relationship of his adult life. Carl Jung had been Sigmund Freud's chosen successor. Their letters read less like colleagues and more like a father, and a son who both needed the arrangement more than either would admit. And when the break came, it came with the specific cruelty that only that kind of relationship can produce. Within a year, Jung had resigned his lectureship at the University of Zurich, stepped back from his professional circles, and stopped publishing almost entirely. His colleagues assumed he was falling apart. Some of them said so openly. He did not correct them. He wasn't falling apart. Or he was, but he later described those years as the most important of his life. Everything he became afterward came out of that silence. And here's what should unsettle you. He didn't disappear because he was broken by the loss. He disappeared because the loss stripped away something he'd been performing for so long that he'd forgotten it was a performance. Which raises a question almost nobody wants to sit with. What if withdrawal isn't a symptom of a life going wrong? What if it's what a life looks like the moment it starts going right? And going right hurts far more than anyone warned you. You know the exact moment. You just never had words for it. It starts small. A conversation you used to enjoy suddenly feels like work. Someone says something and you smile, and the smile costs you something it didn't cost you a year ago. Then it spreads. You start rehearsing yourself before you enter a room. You catch yourself performing an enthusiasm you don't feel, agreeing with something you stopped believing in years ago, laughing at a rhythm instead of a joke. Then it gets physical. You see a name light up your screen, and something in your chest tightens before you've even read the message. You turn the phone face down. You tell yourself you'll reply tonight. You don't reply tonight. You type something out 3 days later, read it back, and delete it. Because every version sounds like a lie or a confession, and you don't have the strength for either. And underneath all of it, a voice you can't locate keeps saying the same sentence. This isn't me. This hasn't been me for a long time. So you pull back. Not dramatically. You just get busy. You reply slower. You cancel one thing, then another. And the relief that floods in is so enormous, so out of proportion, that it genuinely frightens you. But here's the part you can't say to anyone. The explanation sounds unhinged out loud. I disappeared because I got tired of being someone I invented at 19. Nobody says that at a dinner table. So you let them think you're depressed. You let them think you've become arrogant. You let them think whatever they want, because those explanations are cheaper to hand over than the real one. And eventually a friend stops asking. Not angrily, they just stop. And you feel 2 things at once, and one of them is grief, and the other one is relief, and you have no idea what kind of person that makes you. Jung had a name for the thing that was quietly collapsing. He called it the persona. He took the word from the Latin for the mask worn by actors in classical theater. The persona, in his framework, is not a lie. It's an interface. It's the version of you assembled, mostly without your consent, out of what your family rewarded, what your school punished, what your work demanded, and what your friends found tolerable. You need one. Jung was explicit about that. A person with no persona has no way to live among other people. The problem is, what happens when the mask fits too well? Because the better you are at reading a room, anticipating a reaction, and adjusting yourself accordingly, the more seamless the mask becomes, and the more completely you vanish inside it. Intelligence doesn't protect you from this. Intelligence makes you better at it. The sharpest people in any room are often the ones who have not been themselves in years, precisely because they were so good at being what was required. Jung called the process of coming out of it individuation, not self-improvement, not upgrading the persona, becoming the thing the persona was built on top of. And he was honest about the cost. Individuation begins when the mask stops fitting and there is nothing underneath it yet. You have lost the character you were playing, and you have not yet found the person you were. That gap is where the disappearing happens. He didn't theorize this from a comfortable chair. Between 1913 and 1919, he lived it, recording his own confrontation with his unconscious in private journals that eventually became the Red Book. And then, in 1923, the year his mother died, he bought land at Bollingen on the shore of Lake Zurich and began building a stone tower by hand. He kept adding to it for decades. He deliberately left it without electricity. Sit with that image. A man at the height of his intellectual power, in the year he buried his mother, building himself a place where nobody could reach him. In modern language, this is what happens when your nervous system finally refuses the cost of misrepresenting yourself. The withdrawal is not the illness. The withdrawal is the correction. But Jung saw something darker inside it too, and this is where most people never make it out. Here's the trap. Once you've stepped out of the performance, the silence feels like truth, and it is, for a while. For the first time in years, nobody needs anything from you. You're not editing yourself, you're not managing anyone's picture of you. The quiet is clean, and clean is a feeling you didn't know you'd been starving for. And that cleanness is seductive enough to mistake for a destination. This is the stage where people get stuck. Not in the collapse, in the aftermath. They find the solitude, they find the relief, and they quietly build a permanent life inside it. And slowly a story starts forming, one where everyone else is shallow and they alone are awake. The withdrawal that began as honesty hardens into contempt, and contempt is comfortable, because contempt never asks you to risk anything. Jung was blunt about this. Individuation was never meant to end in isolation. He argued the reverse. A person who becomes genuinely themselves becomes more capable of real relationship, not less, because they finally have something real to bring into the room. The disappearing was supposed to be a passage, not an address. So the question was never whether you should withdraw. You already have. The question is what you're actually doing in there. Are you building something, or have you just found somewhere it doesn't hurt? I'll be honest about my version of this, because it isn't the noble one. The quiet is easy to romanticize. You tell yourself you're doing deep work, and some days you genuinely are. But some days you're just avoiding the far harder thing, which is walking back into your own life and being slightly different in front of people who knew the old version and liked it. That's the part nobody warns you about. Coming back is worse than leaving. Leaving is silent. Coming back has witnesses. There's a specific kind of shame in it. You have to explain a year of absence to someone who did nothing wrong. You have to sit across from a person who cared about you and admit you weren't hurt, you weren't busy, you were just gone. And you have to watch them decide whether that's forgivable. Some of them won't forgive it. That's the price, and it's a real one, and I'm not going to tell you it isn't. But when you go back, you'll learn something you could not have learned inside the silence. A few people will meet the new version of you with something close to recognition, as if they'd been waiting for you to stop pretending. Others will treat you like you've become difficult. Both reactions are information. Both of them cost you something to receive. The point of the silence was never the silence. It was to find out which parts of your life were built on you, and which parts were built on the mask. And you can only find that out by taking the mask off in front of someone, and watching what they do. So if you've gone quiet, you're not lost, but you're not finished either. Sometime in the next few months, an ordinary message will arrive. Nothing important. Something you could leave sitting there for another week, the way you've left the others. And you'll feel the pull to stay inside the quiet, because the quiet has never once asked you to be anything. That's the moment, not the leaving, the choosing whether the silence was a passage or a place. Jung wrote that we cannot live the afternoon of life by the program of life's morning, because what was true in the morning becomes a lie by evening. You already stopped living by the morning's program. That's why you disappeared. Now the only question left is what you're planning to do with the rest of the day.